Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of NCBA's Coffee Break, where we talk about the issues affecting the credit and debt collection industry, one cup of coffee at a time. I'm your host, Nathan Willner, and today we're tackling a topic that a lot of people in our industry have heard about, maybe even encountered, but still find confusing, frustrating, and honestly just plain baffling. Today we're talking about sovereign citizens. Now, if you've ever received a motion written entirely in capital letters, or a notice stamped in red ink referencing the Magna Carta, maritime law, or something called the flesh and blood human, you know exactly what we're talking about. And to help us unpack all of this, I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, attorney Caren Enloe, who has quite literally written a recent in-depth law review article on sovereign citizens and related movements. Caren, welcome to today's podcast.
Hey, thanks, Nathan. I'm glad to be here.
So, before we dive in, give our listeners a quick overview of your background and how you became the person people turn to on sovereign citizen issues.
So I practice in Raleigh, North Carolina with Smith Devnum, and I run our consumer finance, compliance, and litigation group. That's a fancy way of saying I do the defense litigation over here and do some compliance work. Started dealing with sovereign citizens back in the 90s. And then kind of, had my first foray with them back then. And then again in the 2000s when the mortgage crisis hit. And then we've really seen those claims really tick up with the proliferation of social media in the last probably 3 years. And so that kind of really made me get interested in the topic and really start kind of digging in on it.
So, let's go ahead and start at square one. When people hear the term sovereign citizen, what does it actually mean? Because it does sound almost, official.
Yeah, it does. It's a really fancy way of saying things, right? So the sovereign citizens movement really goes back even into the 1800s, with tax protesters and people that were anti-government extremists. A friend of mine uses the term want and woe a lot, and I think it's a really good description of how sovereign citizens kind of pop up. They tend to pop up in times of want and woe. And so they started really with tax protesters, and then they kind of moved into this licensing stuff with driver's licenses and license plates and things like that. And then it's really kind of caught on in the credit industry as well. But generally, they are people that don't believe in government. They believe that they themselves are the sovereign and they get to make their own rules, and the government does not control or rule them. Statutes have no meanings, and they can pretty much write their own rules. The scary thing about them is when you start talking about them is there are so many of them, and you start looking at the numbers that have come in over the last couple of years. And this has really gotten the attention of people like the Southern Law Poverty Center, the Anti-Defamation League. They're estimating that there are somewhere between 350 and 400,000 sovereign citizens in the US. And the reason I became so interested in it is because North Carolina is one of the hot spots for them.
So they believe that they're somehow outside the legal system,
That's
but
right.
still at the same time using the court system to file their paperwork, right?
Oh, that's the sweet irony of it all, isn't it? These rules don't apply to me, so let's make some more up, and I'd like you to apply these instead, please.
It's really is baffling. One of the questions that I hear often are these people serious? Or is this just an elaborate excuse to avoid debt, taxes, legal responsibility? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them have really drunk the Kool-Aid. There are TikTok videos out there, and if you go on um, to YouTube and things like that, you will find people teaching courses on this as a way to mend your credit, to do credit repair. And, they're using terms that are real. They're using specific provisions of the UCC. They're citing, you know, laws and conventions and things that maybe the US hasn't adopted, but they're real. And so there are people that are true believers in this. And then there are the people that aren't, are just trying to throw something out there. One thing that's important to note is they take great offense when they're called a sovereign citizen. A lot of them have tried to disavow the movement so that they don't get tied to it or associated with it.
And none of it has ever actually worked. Is that correct?
nothing that I have ever seen. I'm not aware of a single recorded or filed case that it has worked in. But I will say that if you're in Podunk County where the judge is an elected official, you might not get out on your motion to dismiss. The way that things really go south is when a creditor or a law firm or whoever the particular victim or target is um, tends to blow it off. I've seen a couple of cases where those have gone south, specifically in the arbitration realm, where there was a bogus arbitration and the the respondent in the arbitration kind of rolled their eyes, didn't appear because it wasn't a real arbitration forum. Next thing they know, there's a motion to confirm the arbitration award, and the court's like, so I've got an arbitration award here. What do I
Hmm.
do? And so I think, you have to take them seriously. You can't ignore them as much as we would all like to.
So at this point, let's talk specifically about our audience: creditors, debt collectors, law firms, attorneys that do debt collection. Why does sovereign citizen ideology show up so frequently in debt collection matters?
Well, it's like I said before, Nathan, they show up in times of want and woe. And if you think about really where we've had the big proliferation of these claims in our industry, it's been in times where there's a high delinquency rate and people and the economy may not be at its strongest, and people are trying to deal with debt and looking for ways to get out of debt. And this provides them with hope when they listen to these YouTube videos or TikToks, they get hope that maybe they can get out of this. And so, they're looking at a contract and now they're trying to find ways around it. And the problem is, they're doing things like we're literally making a check from scratch, not from a bank account, but they're printing money basically, trying to get out of it because someone told them that they could. And so that's why they come up so much here. And then, they're kind of, it's paper terrorism, really. They are filing things against executives, C-level suite executives in large financial institutions. They're coming after the attorneys. They're coming after the poor guy who's just your collection witness who signed an affidavit. They are really trying to look at ways to make you back down and forgive the debt. So that's why we see them so much here. And again, it really kind of goes back to there's all kinds of ties to times of turbulence, political unrest,
Yeah.
financial issues, a weak economy. That's
So
why
let's shift.
we see it so much here.
Yeah. So it's tied into troubling times, people looking for an escape. But let's shift gears a bit because this stuff can, while it feels completely ridiculous, there's a much darker side. I mean, why should people take sovereign citizen activity seriously? It's not just some kook, you know?
Yeah, well, because they are a lot of times it turns into violence. You look at when it came up in the 70s when during when there was the farm crisis, there was a shootout someplace in the Midwest where several people were killed out of this movement, or out of the movement that became this. You look at the Oklahoma City bombing, people tied to that were sovereign citizens. January 6th, there's been some ties there. And so, some of these, I had one of these a few years ago where me and one of my partners were basically being called into kangaroo court, their court. And we had good company. There were several judges that had been invited to come be tried, as well as a couple of sheriffs and everything else. We politely did not show up in Iredell County for that. So you need to be wary. There have been shootings involved. There is tied to violent acts with it. I'm not trying to scare people, and I'm not trying to be, really dramatic about it, but there is, and so you have to be super careful.
Yeah. So that's an important distinction because like laughing it off can actually make the situation worse.
Yeah,
So
you have to be on your guard. I mean, a lot of
yeah,
times will, and a lot of times when there's sovereign citizens involved, the judges will call you up to the bench afterwards and say, and basically just say in a very low voice, "Hi, I'm going to have the bailiff take you out the back," which I'm very appreciative of when that happens. And they're like, "Oh, we want you to go sit for 15 minutes first." You're like,
yeah.
"Thank you, Your Honor." please,
Yeah,
because you
no,
don't know.
it's not something to make light of. I mean, it's
Huh.
pretty serious. So let's leave our listeners with something practical. If you encounter sovereign citizen arguments in a collection matter, we're not going to be able to go into every nuance of it, but what should you do and what should you avoid?
Well, I think what you need to do is take it seriously. I mean, as much as you want to roll your eyes, you're seeing statutes like 1306 and things like that, or 1308, where there were the real legitimate statutes, right? And so go ahead and spend some time looking at what they're saying. The good news is now versus when I first started having these cases and encountering them, there's quite a bit of case law out there. I mean, a lot of case law. And if you can walk into a judge and say, here's what they're saying, here's what the statute says, here's how the statute really works. And by the way, here are 18 case cites to cases that have dismissed actions on this grounds as frivolous. You can get out of there. You can get out of there pretty quickly with a good result. But just and it's so easy. There's so much paper with it. I mean, just reading it, none of it makes sense. I can turn it upside down and it makes no more sense than if I'm looking at it right side up. And so, but you do have to take them seriously, and you need to go ahead and respond, address it. Motion to dismiss is always practical. It may take you 2 or 3 tries to get to where you need to get, because judges are trying to, treat them like they would any pro se and give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean that's great advice, and this has been incredibly helpful. You've taken something really confusing, made it understandable, but and frankly actionable. Um, for listeners who want to go deeper, we'll link Karen's law review article in the episode description. I really encourage our listeners to take a look at it because it's really done from a scholarly perspective. And Karen, from what I understand, even law enforcement's taking a look at it, taking a look
Yeah,
at
I
this
was
thing.
told by a friend of mine that the FBI is using my article, and I know that one of the federal judges in Massachusetts actually asked me for a copy right before it was published because they hadn't dealt with it up there. So yeah,
Yeah,
and we've got some clients that are using it as well as guidance. So, what I did was I just went through and kind of went through the theories and why they don't work and provided a lot of citations, which I think is helpful to understand it.
yeah. This has been really kind of sobering cup of coffee about what people might encounter. But I fear that with the volume of debt collection cases increasing in the country, and so much on the internet and so much misinformation, unfortunately, sometimes people that are already in a financial bind put themselves in a worse bind by following this kind of fake
Yeah.
information. But yeah, so I think unfortunately people in the industry are going to see more and more of this, and your law review article couldn't be more timely because I think we're going to have to be challenged by this. But anyway, Karen, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really great. I hope you don't need more than one cup of coffee a day, but we'll hopefully have you back and talk a little bit more about this. So thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for listening. If you're enjoying this episode of NCBA Coffee Break, be sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. And until next time, may your affidavits be short, your filings be legible, and your maritime law references stay firmly at sea. So thank you very much. Have a good time this weekend. If any of our listeners are going to be able to take a break from all this, but if not, we'll see you back on another episode of NCBA's Coffee Break. Thank you to our guest again, Caren Enloe. It was great information. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye bye.